Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, to another international special interest group networking and knowledge forum. Usually we do these functions every month in person. We're now, like most of the world, are getting used to the virtual realities of Zoom and Teams. But nevertheless, we've got a great agenda today and three speakers who are going to be talking about creating a collaborative procurement model for supply and demand side organizations. Just a little bit about the ISIG. The ISIG, the International Special Interest Group, is run by volunteers to provide a forum for workplace and facility management professionals who are interested not only in international facilities practice, but also strategic issues. If you want to get involved in the ISIG, please feel free to contact me or join the LinkedIn group. Follow us on Twitter. All of our events do have a CPD content, and we'll be getting CPD numbers to you if you do follow continuing professional development as part of your own personal development. Just to thank our sponsors. The ISIG wouldn't be able to put on these events without our valued sponsor. For several years now, ISS has been our sponsor. I think this time last year or earlier last year, we were visiting ISS's head office as part of an international study trip that we done to Denmark, and we're really grateful for ISS to continually sponsor the ISIG. As I mentioned, we're going to have the three speakers. I'm Steve Gladwin. I chair the International Special Interest Group. We've got some questions that we've already formulated, but what I'd ask every one of you that's on the call today, if you've got questions that you would like to ask the panelists, please feel free to use the chat function. And when we go through the debate, we will open up that questions from the audience. So please feel free as we go through to put any observations or questions on the chat forum. We're going to be going until about 3 o'clock today, so 1 hour for the event. And I'll just introduce our panelists today. We've got Sean Gibbons, who's the head of global facility management and real estate for Roche Pharmaceuticals. Many people might know Roche, many people might not have heard of Roche, but they're the second largest pharmaceutical company in the world with turnovers of 57 billion US dollars. And Sean's got 30 years experience working in facilities and real estate management, both as a consultant, as a service provider, as well as this current role where he's worked at Roche for the last 10 years, leading a center for best practice and guidance. So Sean's representing the client side. Representing the service provider side, we've got Simon Titchener, who's the Chief Commercial Officer for ISS. I think ISS is probably one of the largest facility service providers in the world. Simon joined ISS 2007, working across various roles, UK and globally, before joining the board in 2019. And Simon is the Commercial Officer for ISS. Kind of sitting in the middle, wedged right between the middle of supply and demand, is David Hawkins from the Institute of Collaborative Working. And many of you might have heard of some standards of collaborative business relationships. And David was very much the architect and the author and the designer of what was formerly BS 11,000 collaborative business relationships, and then went to ISO 44,001, I think it was. And I remember David telling us once why he came up with 44,001, and it was because it was the UK country code on the dial-in telephones, and that's how I remember. I think it's 44,001. But David's got 40 years experience of partnering and collaboration, not only in maintenance and business services, but also from construction. So it's a very good panel that we've got that's going to give us a kind of an opinion on collaboration. And when we think about collaboration, I think never has the time come when we need to collaborate more. If we just look at that word collaboration, it's made up of two Latin words, co, with, and labor, to labor together. but we've got the uncertainties of Brexit that are facing us. We don't need to talk about the uncertainties of COVID, but over the last 15, 20 years, I think we've had this race to the bottom where we've almost commoditized facility services. We've had organizations that are no longer with us. We all know the organizations I'm talking about, like Carillion, but we've also seen other organizations like Interserve almost go into the wall, but being delisted. And the list goes on, George Birchall, Rock, Connaught, Jarvis Accommodation Services. So Carillion was probably the last of many organisations that are no longer with us, where we've almost commoditized the service and gone for the cheapest price perhaps. So we've got to give consideration of how this whole procurement process gets us a more sustainable outcome, where we're focusing on mutual benefits, the win-win rather than the self-interest. So this is a real hot topic for our market at the moment, for our profession at the moment. And never as, I don't think in the history that I've been in FM, as some of the support services that we often quite wrongly take for granted have been elevated to a position where we need to be getting great value. Not only great value, but great service. If I think about cleaning and how cleaning is important, well, it's always been important, but now we should really be recognizing all facility services rather than just forgetting them as being the low cost, low value proposition. So I'm really interested to see what the panel have got to say about how we can work together to get this collaborative procurement approach that works for both demand side and supply side, and getting the commercial and contractual terms that get that win-win and incentivize both parties. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I truly believe in the UK we've got some leading standards, not only the one I mentioned that David might talk about, but also ISO 41012, which is a collaborative business approach to getting FM agreements, developing FM agreements. So I hope that might come through from the panel today. Enough from me. What we're here to do is listen to the experts, Sean, David, and Simon. So I might kick off with a couple of questions. So question one, in light of the recession, does the panel believe that demand side organizations will revert to price-based decisions or embrace a more collaborative approach to working with suppliers? I hope I know the answer, but I'm going to throw to Sean first from Roche. Sean, would you give us a view on that, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Steve, for that. I think from my perspective, looking at the COVID and Brexit-driven economic impacts that are not just continuing, but are causing even less certainty than we would expect during a general recessionary situation. And together with the upcoming expected double-dip recession in Europe, it's driving a lot of uncertainty. And this is something that both on the demand and supply side, the FM industry needs to focus on and address. I think the nature of the engagement style, so price versus collaborative, is probably a wider issue. And while we do see prevailing economic conditions tend to indicate a move perhaps to a more price-focused strategy, I think there's certainly a need for organizations with long-term critical requirements to be able to rely on their supply chain, not just for the day-to-day service delivery, but also to act as a link to the FM industry and to really bring value to the relationship by innovative approaches that deliver enhanced, more reliable service to the client, but also provide headroom for improved margin on the supply side. And I think companies that do have really an overt focus on costs typically struggle to be to develop trust with their service provider, and as a result probably miss out on the wider benefits of supplier collaboration. These are things like access to innovation, streamlining existing processes, enhancing existing capabilities, and then a more robust approach to risk management. So that's just my synopsis of the view on the first question, Steve.
Okay, so you're very much arguing that we're going to go to more collaborative approaches, looking at trust, innovation, and value. What about
Absolutely.
Simon? I mean, Simon, from ISS's point of view, you must be on the receiving end of many tenders that are very price driven. Let's get the cheapest price. We're struggling. Let's get some companies in a room and get the cheapest price. What's your view of the world?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I think firstly, it very much depends on the sectors that we're talking to. So there are sectors that are very much looking at the collaborative approach, which we welcome and we look forward to that. But there are a number of sectors that are very much price focused and remain that way. I think the challenge is that for us as an organisation, we are now being much more selective on therefore who we would want to work with, and actually we refuse to actually take part in a number of RFPs that we can see very clearly are just down to a sort of a bidding war to get the lowest price. So we now will exclude ourselves from those on numerous occasions. I think the big thing for us is that the trusting from the customer side is the thing that is still the challenge when we come to talking around the collaborative approach. And I think even more so now, given the current economic challenges, there is a need for it, because actually most customers, when they are talking to us, the key things they want is agility, flexibility to be able to change things quickly. And often with a very, very restrictive, input-based, price-driven approach, that really takes away the opportunity for us as an organisation to be responsive, to be agile, to be innovative, to actually help and support that customer during these really challenging times. So I see some real positives from certain sectors in the marketplace, but equally I see a real now rush to get the cheapest price from other parts of the industry.
So very much sector specific.
Yeah.
Simon, you mentioned about trust. So if I kind of jump to that last question on the page there about the behaviours, how do we change this behaviour where there is a lack of trust?
I think it's, I mean, it all comes down to sort of transparency, I suppose, on both sides. And I think, probably as an industry, we've not exactly helped ourselves over the years of being transparent and forthcoming on how and where we make our money. Equally, I think certainly from a customer perspective, it's often around job protection. I think often we see that as an issue where when we're in discussions with customers, it's, is my team going to be safe? Are you going to come into my space and therefore I'm going to be out of a job? And it's trying to put those historical sort of issues to one side and say, look, we both need to have some guardrails in this, but actually we both want the same thing, and it's trying to foster that, and it is a challenge at times.
So that transparency, are you looking at transparency on the commercial model so it's fully open book?
Yep, I think that's something we very much have been working towards and with customers over the last few years, more and more of that. But equally, it's also wanting the transparency from the customer side as well. So when we're trying to put together a pricing, be transparent. Tell us, give us the correct information. Don't try and sort of keep things back just in case for a further negotiation. Let's try and get it all out up front and work together on the solution, rather than this sort of tension that sometimes just doesn't need to be there.
Yeah, it's quite a refreshing position, Simon, to recognise when you said that we haven't always got it right. Sean, from your perspective, then, how do we change, and how do we change the behaviours, and what existing behaviours do we change? I mean, Simon's just mentioned about the in-house team. So what's your view on how we kind of change things?
I guess I think looking at it from the demand side, I think supply side FM industry needs to create a better position for itself. And this often comes by doing the simple things better, delivering the nuts and bolts of the services well and reliably. And I think, you know, and this is where I think this tension comes in often. You know, beyond the RFP stage, we're running the contract. It's difficult to work collaboratively with the supply chain until it delivers the basics well. And sometimes this is often not the case. I think there also needs to be a recognition by the supply side that price will continue to remain important, and that value for money will always be the cornerstone of any commercial relationship like this. I think one of the issues that we also see from supply side organizations is often not taking an enterprise approach when looking at the value of the relationship. So, for example, we often need to speak to different leaders representing different service lines who each have a focus on their own P&L, quite rightly, when we want to discuss services across the entire spectrum. So from facility operations to workplace strategy to real estate transactions, project management, etc. And I think a change to a more enterprise-led approach, recognizing this real need that exists within corporates, I think would definitely lead to benefits both on the demand and supply side. I think if I reflect internally and look at the demand side organization, I think we need to focus on what is the long-term value. There needs to be a defined FM strategy, identification of what are the clear value drivers, which will extend beyond savings, compliance, risk mitigation, customer satisfaction, and so on and so forth. And then that trust needs to be developed across both the demand and supply sides. So it allows us to ask and to push for more innovative solutions to get more for our money with these suppliers, and to work with suppliers that are more inclined to support us with the challenges, so they effectively see themselves as an extension to our business. How do we do this? Well, I think, you know, we need to view our vendors not only at a procurement level, but also at a business level as business partners. And I think stakeholders within the business also need to reconsider, you know, how much to squeeze the lemon, and to really look to embrace win-win scenarios. So it's about how we interact with suppliers, and how we can actually build trust both ways.
Sean, you mentioned there about taking this enterprise-wide approach. Suppliers need to take that approach, and I got the impression that you were referring to profit center management in suppliers that might work on a country by country basis or a division by division basis. And I see that as often a challenge where if you're working for a large multinational, you do have profit center management mindset where everyone's looking after their own profit center. That's reading into what you were saying, that's the impression I got. But that also happens client side, where a supplier might get a contract with Roche or another large multinational, and they can look after the commercial buildings, but the manufacturing is a protected entity. So sometimes the clients don't always take that enterprise-wide approach to the value that a service provider can give. What would you say to that comment?
No, I fully accept that. I mean, I think it goes both ways, and this comes back to the point that I made that, you know, we need to start off with a defined strategy. What is our strategy? Where are we now? Where do we want to go? And how do we get there? And what's in scope and what's out scope? And how do we identify what are the key drivers of value within the organization? So absolutely. I mean, I accept that it sits both ways. We, as you quite rightly say, You know, there is beyond the yellow line, there's often, you know, a difference of responsibility within, for example, GMP areas. So yeah, totally accept that, and I think it's work that needs to be done on both sides.
And before I kind of go to David, just to give us a view from a collaborative best practice perspective, you mentioned about the in-house team, you know, the threat to the in-house team. What do you think the profession, the industry needs to do to reposition the in-house teams that are often feeling very threatened by some of these larger deals?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a case of really refocusing, so becoming less doers and more with a focus on management, developing the strategy, the FM strategy for the organization. Some people can adapt and do that with ease. Others, I think it's more of a challenge. So I think with any change on the supply side, so consolidating suppliers, going to IFM, where perhaps there has been a degree of self-delivery so far, comes with a big chunk of change management that has to take place. You know, these people cannot continue doing the same job that they've been doing for the last 10, 15, 20 years. And all too often that's missed. You know, it's just seen as, this is an opportunity, we can save some money, we keep the existing organization as it is, and then it fails because people kind of are caught in the middle. And often what we see is that, you know, people will use it as an opportunity to say, this new supplier is not performing, we should go back to the old model. So that trust that has taken time to build up inevitably gets lost.
So there's almost a requirement for the in-house team to be retrained, move into more strategic thinking and that change management. Before I go to David, Simon, did you want to comment on any of Sean's comments there?
No, I mean, I actually fully support what Sean says. I think, you know, it is on both sides. I think, you know, I've seen a fair amount of challenge from the supplier side around the sort of the P&L issue, which is something we're continuing addressing certainly within my remit within ISS. And the change management piece is critical. And I think the whole thing around the roles and responsibilities, it's sort of, you go through often a very long, expensive process of an RFP, and then the time and money on both sides in the investment on that transition often falls short. And that's where you really need to focus the time and energy and some investment is on that change management piece, because otherwise you say, we take over on a Monday and the people that are there on the Friday continue doing the same thing. And then you get into that whole downward spiral of sort of man marking, and the trust sort of becomes, you know, worse and worse, when it could be avoided if you have that upfront sort of discussions around, okay, now this is our roles and responsibilities, this is yours, and equally understanding that both sides will need some development and support in some of those team members to make that change. And that's critical. But yeah, I think I've seen some really good examples where it's worked, and you can reap the rewards, and others where that piece has just been missing altogether. And you know, a year into a contract, you both sides think, actually, we haven't achieved what we've set out to do at all.
Yeah. Okay, let's throw over to David Hawkins now, who's the from the Institute of Collaborative Working. David, what would you suggest we could do to improve this situation?
Right, I've just switched on. Okay, it's interesting to listen to both sides of this debate. The first question that I tend to ask any organisation that starts using words like collaboration is, what do they mean by it? I think that's probably the biggest challenge, because everybody's got a different expectation, and in fact that's where I started from. So, you know, you mentioned 44,001, and thanks for the plug on the telephone code. It was an interesting debate when we had ISO 11000 in place up until about 3 days before it went to publication, and then ISO realised that they'd actually already used the number, which is a bit worrying for an international standards body. Having said that, I take my ICW hat off and put my chair of, because I chair the international committee that developed that standard and is still working on it. So my first question is, when people talk about the strategy, you have to look at the whole scope from end to end. And one of the things that surprised everybody when we brought out the framework was actually that one of the key elements of that was the exit strategy. If you want to start building trust, you've got to start from the back end and work forward. Because I think people are scared to transfer responsibility if they haven't fully thought through the implications of what happens at the end of the day. I think one of the things we're seeing right now, and I guess this is a fallout of the pandemic, is resilience is one of the issues which is hitting lots of companies right now. And those that have strong relationships with their external providers are finding it a lot easier to cope with some of the ups and downs that they're being faced with. And I think when you talk about Brexit, I'm not sure any of us understand what the implications of that are going to be until we actually get there and start doing it. I will say, I knew everybody's mentioned it, the race to the bottom has left organisations suffering. They've gone so far to this commoditisation that actually they lost sight of the fact that actually what is FM all about? It's about making sure an organisation's systems and processes are fit for purpose and provide an environment where the people who are actually turning spanners and doing stuff have an environment that's conducive to their work environment. So one of the discussions we've been having recently, I've been doing a lot of stuff with the Cabinet Office who are trying to change this, at least change the view. One of the questions I keep asking is are other departments that are contracting for this stuff actually ready to do it? And it probably reflects back as well on some of the organisations who are providing those services not being ready. So the focus, in my view, is towards an output-based contracting philosophy. How you want to do that is entirely up to you. But we've already mentioned price about 10 times through this debate. And it's not about price, it's about value, and it's about impact, and it's about overall cost. And I think, when both sides start to think like that, that's the way to go. I will put my hand up and say I'm not a standards man. I've often told my friends, if you want to lose the will to live, you join an ISO committee, because you can spend hours debating dots and commas, which isn't the world that I'm used to. But you mentioned trust, and somebody mentioned several times win-win. I think that's a misnomer. I used to love it when I was a procurement man going into a win-win as long as I won more than the other guy. I think if true collaboration is about one win, and that's we all win or we all lose, because that's the way it comes across. So from our perspective, I think both customers and contractors need to find a platform on which they can develop what their interpretation of collaboration really means. And that's where I think that things like the ISO standard provide that dialogue. It sits in the center of the table, and it's not what the committee thought was the answer to the question, it's what the parties involved think the answer to the question is, and actually building that into their contracting philosophy.
David, can I pick up on something you said there? Paraphrasing, but you said, when I was a procurement man, I wanted a win.
Yep.
Is the problem we have in FM our procurement colleagues?
I think in part, I think it's one of those reciprocal elements. I think the race to the bottom has been a predefined philosophy that where it started.
Sorry to interrupt. You were a procurement person, David.
Yeah.
And what were you rewarded on? What was your driver? Being
Saving
honest.
money, well, saving money. And it took me years to work out that killing my contractors was not a good idea because I ran out of contractors.
So,
It's when you start to realise that, you know, the old philosophy of the only good contractor is hanging from a lamppost bleeding to death. That's all right until you run out of lampposts and contractors, and it
so you've
doesn't really
seen the
get you
light.
very well. Yes, many years ago,
So what do we
because
do? What do we do now to change this frame with some of our procurement colleagues? Because I don't know what it's like in Roche. I can't speak for Sean, but as a head of global workplace, I'd imagine that there's a strong procurement team. I'd imagine that Simon from ISS has to almost have an each way bet sometimes, talking to the procurement colleagues who want one thing and then the FM workplace team that want another. So what do we do with our procurement colleagues, David?
well, I think you have to go back to this debate, and it starts with, you know, the first question I ask any organisation is, why do you want to work collaboratively? So what's the business case for doing it? If the business case makes sense, then you can start to articulate to people why you want to change the methodology. But I think we've got ourselves into an ever decreasing spiral of contractors reacting to customers, customers reacting to, and I think Simon made the comment, some of people in the industry haven't been as forthright and as open as they probably should be, which has left clients holding the baby. So there's a whole trust issue in there, and I think
Yeah,
there has to be a different kind of debate.
absolutely. Before I move on to question 2, Sean and Simon, did you want to have any last comments to someone that's evangelical and seen the light from his procurement days? And
Only I can recognise some of the things he's been saying, and yeah. But you're right. It is around one team winning, with it happens to sit on both sides, not two sides.
Yeah,
I mean,
and I
I will
think
say I might be evangelical, but collaboration doesn't mean you have to roll over and play dead. You know, there's still things like accountability and responsibility. And I agree with the comment. You know, if you want trust, the first thing you've got to do is perform. If you can't do
Yes,
that,
absolutely.
everything else is a complete waste of time.
yeah, doing the basics well, I think Sean referred it to. And
Yeah.
yeah,
I
Sean, any
think
final comments before we move
yeah,
on to question
I mean
2?
just to pick up on these things. I mean, I think within life sciences we're starting to shift to move towards relationships of longer term value. That gives both parties an opportunity to build and to demonstrate trust, build confidence, and ensuring that we can have this dialogue about a wider and long-term value aside from price. So it's looking at value beyond savings, and this is where we do often have a challenge, particularly with procurement organizations. As David said, procurement are measured on how much they can save based on one service line and a new contract with the same service line moving forward. I think more enlightened supply side organizations are starting to create a better focus on this holistic value. But I think there's more that could be done to share these stories and successes across the industry so that we don't always come down to the bottom line. Similarly, internally, I think from the business side, we have to say, within life sciences, compliance is actually the most important thing. If we can't comply, if we can't keep a GMP environment up and running, then products can't go out of the door.
Sure.
So, it's really changing that focus to say, look, we're not buying, it's not sort of commoditized. We're really focusing on something that is far more important, of which cost will always be a cornerstone, regardless of how we wrap it up. But there are certain other aspects as well which are equally, if not more important. And to recognize that, having these ongoing longer term relationships really provide a competitive advantage to the supply side rather than just these one-off projects. I think just wrapping up the final point on this, and this is really dealing with the engagement with the business. So this lack of will to sort of move to a different model, whether that's from the internal FM organization or from the procurement, is what we have to look at is putting in place some uniform process frameworks and also align internal staff remuneration to really incentivize engagement and to drive that collaboration. And that just doesn't exist in most places at the moment. It's still seen as a sort of an area for potential conflict.
I like that, Sean. That's something I think we need to come back to another time. How do we incentivize the in-house retained team, because they can make a huge difference, not just beating the contractor over the head, but adding value to the organization. I don't want to see that beating up the subcontractor mindset. It's about how do they act more strategically and add value. Okay, let's move on. Question 2, how well prepared is the FM function, both supply and demand, to respond to a collaborative approach? I might kind of go to Simon first on that one. Simon, how well prepared is the FM industry
I
to
can't
collaborate?
obviously talk for everybody, but I think from my perspective in our organisation, I think we have spent quite a considerable amount of time in the last 12 to 18 months on really sort of re-looking at how we do sort of work in the market, how we do collaborate with our customers and prospective customers. So I think it's also looking at a different skill set than perhaps we've had before. So, you know, what we now need is much more consultative ways of working, especially in a business development environment, which tended to be very much a sort of your typical sales, must win it at all costs type of situation, where we don't even call it sales or business development, we call it commercial, because actually it's much wider than just the sale, and it is around a much more consultative type of individual. So looking at different skills, bringing into the organisation that can work with the teams in our organisation and customers teams to get that right outcome that both organisations are looking for. So I think that's what we've tried to do, and actually have changed a fair amount of our teams around to be in that position to go to market in a very different way.
And you mentioned, Simon, that some markets, sector specific, I think you said. How do you find then that you might have account staff working on a very much a collaborative approach, and taking on David's point, that's not about rolling over and just agreeing to everything, but then you've got some accounts that are just hard dollar, very commercial, very contractual, and you're basically in a different environment. So how do you kind of operate those types of?
I think I'll say firstly, obviously it is segment specific. So we very much focus on, if it's a specific segment, the people that are in that segment actually have the skills and understanding and knowledge of how that particular segment works, whether it is in the pharmaceuticals or the aviation or in banking and finance. So someone that actually understands that side of the customer's business, which is key. I think we do, and we do have some tough contracts out there that are complex and difficult, that sort of become almost you have which probably is a frustration for me, the contracts out on a daily basis from both sides, and that's just not a way to do business. So I think the more and more now we are trying to ensure that we don't have customers like that going forward. Our sort of process to sort of decide on whether we're going to bid for something is a very, very detailed process, that very often we probably decline to bid more than we actually do bid these days. And that is because we see very much, sorry, I couldn't quite hear you. The old Siri going off in the background, apologies. yeah, it's you know, we go through a process, and unless it sort of fits certain criteria with that customer, that we'll actually say no, because actually we know through history, sort of certain businesses, we spend the 3 years in a situation that is antagonistic, not what we want to be, not fair on, you know, on our employees as much as probably the customer's employees, and actually, and sometimes culturally it just doesn't work. So let's just focus where we think we can make it work. And I think more and more what we're trying to push for is not the 5,000 page sort of RFP response, but encouraging, if we have a chance, customers to say, can we have some, yeah, in the initial stages, just dialogue sessions to see whether us and you have got are a match, you know, a marriage, you know, because that's such a critical thing. So let's do some of that upfront work rather than so often the beauty parade and meeting and presentations were, you know, right at the end, when a lot of from both sides, a lot of time and effort's been invested. Let's start that up front and see how the relationship can work, and then, you know, come back to, yes, a written response, but something that's much more succinct, much more sort of innovative and forward looking, rather than just, you know, pricing spreadsheet after spreadsheet and putting in every policy and procedure known to man.
Very good. That maybe that internal assessment before partner selection is what you're talking about. Sean, what about your perspective from demand side? Well prepared to have more collaborations, not just in the pharma industry, because I kind of think in the pharma industry there's a history of collaborating, not in our environment FM, but just generally amongst organizations.
Sure. I mean, I guess a key aspect of how well FM function is prepared is prepared for what? And I think building on a point that David made earlier is, you know, we hear a lot about the collaborative approach, but what do we actually mean by that? You know, I think the definition around collaborative procurement, I think, is pretty poor, can be quite variable, and can be spun in, you know, a number of different ways. You know, so a few observations. So does collaborative procurement mean that there should be no competitive tension? This doesn't seem sustainable, not in the short or even in the medium or longer term. If you retain this competitive tension, then how does it actually manifest itself? We need some key drivers of value beyond these financial measures, certainly, but it definitely needs to be recognized. How do we create a real value partnership when the cost and risk, at least in my view, tends to be heavily weighted towards the demand side organization? You end up paying for it one way, regardless of how it's wrapped inside a contract. So in summary, I guess in terms of how well prepared is the FM function, I guess this is variable. Larger demand side organizations with a longer term planning focus, and with that significant resources, tend to be working on the creation of longer term relationship of value. And I think the same thing on the supply side. So we see large FM suppliers with access to resources are also working on the development of longer term, more stable and higher value relationship with a longer planning horizon. So I think it's happening, but it's happening in a sort of fragmented way. Different markets, different sectors have different levels of maturity, and clearly the commercial pressures that different sectors also suffer from will drive some of these behaviours quite heavily.
Okay, and David, can I throw to you now and just give your views, particularly this issue about commercial tension and value for money? How do we achieve that with a collaborative approach, David?
Well,
or do we need to?
I think you do. I mean, at the end of the day, you've got to share the fact that, you know, organisations have limited budgets. They have all sorts of challenges for them. So there's no point in creating a demand which forces people almost with their backs to the wall when they can't deliver what they need to deliver. And I think that's where the downside, I will say, of a standard is we've still got a mindset that standards are about getting a certificate on the wall for making you look good. Certification should be an output, not an objective. And one of the challenges we're seeing right now are organisations, even with a collaborative standard, mandating certification. And that shows the immaturity of the marketplace, because you can't mandate collaboration. It's an oxymoron. It has to be developed. And I think the framework that is there, and I'd be the last one to say it's perfect, but at least it's neutral. And I think that's one of the challenges that we see, is organisations demanding that their contractors be collaborative, and then when you find them getting into a dialogue, it's, oh, well, we didn't realise we had to be involved in the collaboration. Well, I can give you some very construction-based expletives when clients tell me that. It's crazy. So the problem you've got right now is that clients are looking for something different. Contractors are not sure how to do it, and we're not having those competitive dialogues because it takes too long and it costs too much money. But that's probably because people haven't really evaluated the criticality of what they're doing. So, in the good old days of procurement, we sent out a tender, we told people what we wanted them to do, we got everything together, we got compliance, and then we squeezed the price and squeezed it without really understanding what the implications of doing that are. And I agree with Sean. I think longer term contracts provide that comfort zone for contractors to say, well, this is worth investing in and going at it differently. But I think from a client side, instead of looking at it as a bid evaluation at the end of a long and drawn out process, which Simon mentioned, it's about going back to the business case and saying, do we really need to do this? Have we got the resources to do it? Are we set up to do it? And is the payback worth the effort? There's a lot of services that are price based. I mean, if you just want a body for 24 hours a day for 3 years, you can price it. The question is, how many bodies do you need? Do you really need all of them? And can it be done in a different way? So, I mean, one of the comments I put here is that, our experience is the FM industry is a long way behind other sectors in terms of understanding what they can do for their clients in a collaborative environment that they develop with the client.
So when you say we're a long way behind, David, give me an example of a sector where you see they're leading the way in terms of collaboration.
Well, I think that the technology side of it, I mean, the life sciences have been doing this for years with developing a new products in their R&D programs. They've still got something to learn. One of the things coming out of ISO right now is a guidance document that we're working on for large companies based around the standard, because I had a discussion one day with a gentleman from IBM who said we need small, innovative startups to be able to develop our business, but our systems and processes crush them every time we invite them through the door.
So just picking up on that, and a question's come in on the chat box. Looking at those industries that you say are a bit more advanced in collaborations, and I know you've done a lot of work with utilities and rail sector, what can we learn? What maybe one or two things would you say we can learn from those industries that's going to get us raising the bar a bit?
Well, I think firstly you have to look at the real success stories and not the BS that gets put out all over the place about how collaborative we are with our alliances. But I think it's about the industry, and I mean what Simon was saying. You know, some of the bigger organisations are doing it because they can be selective. Smaller organisations can't be. And if customers want to keep the market competitive, they've got to make it advantageous for people to be able to invest the time and the thinking. But the door's got to be open. And I think, you know, one of the things I talk to clients about right now is they talk about wanting collaboration, but their reputation in the marketplace almost predefines the relationship that the contractor is going to put forward. And, you know, I've talked to contractors in many different industries who say the first thing we do when we look at a tender is analyze the profile of the customer, because if we don't think they really mean it, we're not going to play.
Yeah.
Or we're going to put a team in that's opportunistic.
Yeah. Okay, we've got another 10 minutes, I think, and we've got another question here. At the very heart of FM outsourcing, some people say, is the premise of risk transfer. How could this bedrock of outsourcing be addressed under collaborative procurement arrangements? And do you actually agree with that statement? You know, at the heart of outsourcing is risk transfer. Simon, any views from you? Do you agree with that statement, and how can it be addressed under a collaborative procurement approach?
I mean, yeah, certainly I see that absolutely that, you know, if we are going into a partnership with a customer, then, you know, certain risks are transferred. I think that the key to it, and I don't think this is, you know, you can still have the risk transfer under a collaborative or non-collaborative type of arrangement. It's just understanding those risks and making sure that both parties understand what is transferring, but also with certain risks comes certain costs. So depending on that, you have to then, you know, cost in or price in to take over some of those risks. But, you know, there's certainly something that I would never shy away from. And as an organisation, we address that and hit it head on and take those. But understanding what we are going to be taking on and making sure that there is an opportunity to protect ourselves to a certain extent and certainly price for those risks. Because once again, every customer and every segment is different on the kind of risks that they want you to perhaps take on or not take on. But I still see it being a something that can work in a collaborative arrangement, you know, provided you understand it.
Do you think, Simon, that the commercial model on a contract drives the behaviours and ultimately the relationship?
Absolutely.
So we've got to get the commercial model right.
Yeah, I think that's a fundamental, and it's got to say it's got to be right that can work for everybody. You know, and also discuss it and actually solution it together is often the thing to do, because, you know, I've been in situations where there's been from a customer's a preconceived what they want out of a commercial model. They're not going to budge. But once you start having some more conversations and actually throw a few more different options in on where, you know, actually we'll take more risk for if the commercial model's different. And actually by doing that, you can start to sort of understand what are the real, you know, points of that the customer really wants to have in their commercial model. And as I say, it's got to be one that everyone can see a route to having success in. At all levels in the organisation. There's nothing worse for a contract team working on a contract that is loss making.
Yeah.
You know, that doesn't help the customer team either in the end of the day.
Before I go to Sean, when I said that about the commercial model driving the behaviours and the relationship, I thought I saw David nodding there. Any views there, David? Because, well, yeah, you know, sometimes I see these organisations that have, like you say, mandate and we want a collaboration, and then they come out with a commercial model that is guaranteed maximum price with no opportunities for profit, and it's like one-way ticket to the bottom again.
Two things jump into my mind as I was listening to that. The first one is that we have become pre-programmed in a majority of cases for what I term contracting for failure. So we start off with a contract which is designed only for the failure of the parties, and that's a misnomer to start with, because when a contract does fail, the risks that you thought you got rid of come back anyway. The second thing is, if you go through 44,001 through the framework, risk comes up at every level, because risk is the biggest influence on the way people behave, whether it's at an individual level, a functional level, a corporate level. And the clear answer to that, in my opinion at least, and that's brought out in the framework, is that unless you have joint risk management, you won't get risk managed by the right people at the right time, and you won't have the opportunity to, or the opportunity to turn risk into an opportunity. I mean, I see risk as two things. There's threats and there's opportunities. The threats are the things we can manage between us. The opportunities are what we get when we manage the risk effectively.
Very good. Yeah. And finally, Sean, on this, before I go to Sean, I've just got a few comments from the chat box, just for everyone's information. Some suppliers use price as a differentiator. Risk clients focus on the technical skills, not on the softer consultative skills needed to understand the client's business. And where a procurement process tends to focus on a win for the client. That was some views from the chat box. The win from the client, perhaps that's the contractors strung up from lampposts that David mentioned earlier. But Sean, some final comments from you on this question, and we've got not much time left. Actually, we've only got a few minutes left. So Sean, some final comments from you.
Sure. Okay, I mean, I guess I would challenge the premise that the heart of FM outsourcing is risk transfer. I don't think it's really as simple as that. I think risk transfer is part of it, of course, but I think more important is the in-source outsource analysis that really allows organizations to focus on, these are our core activities rather than the non-core. That's got to be the first consideration. Once that decision is taken to outsource, then of course the issue of risk transfer can be addressed. It's not rocket science. Put simply, it's who's best positioned to effectively manage a risk. Obviously, inappropriate allocation of that risk to an organization not equipped to deal with it is often the basic fail. And this can be the case regardless of how collaborative the process might be. I'm just interested in Simon's earlier comment about deciding, which RFPs to bid on and which to pass. And I guess from my side, the question of how do you become a customer of choice? Because I think if you can get into that niche, then many buying organizations end up receiving preferential treatment, which in turn help to manage the risks that may or may not have been transferred, or at least come into a mature, developed dialogue in how to do that. So that's more in terms of getting back to developing the relationship into a true partnership where risk is inevitably shared, and where vendors feel they can come to us when something's not working without us having to, go directly to them and beat them with the big stick. If the relationship isn't there, then inevitably it becomes a blame game.
Very good. And just looking at the clock, we've got 1 minute left, and I just wanted to get a word from you all to say, how do we? What I'm hearing is we've certainly got to do more in terms of collaboration. That's my personal view. I've spent too long in the industry seeing FM commoditized, but also blaming contractors blaming the procurement teams. One thing from each of you, how we change this. Simon, what would you say? What do we need to do to change the behaviours? Just in a quick nutshell.
I think it's all about honesty and transparency, and having upfront conversations at the start of any engaged process. and trying to it's hard to do in one sentence, I have to say. So
that would be a shift. That would be a
yeah,
very big shift, I think, getting
yeah,
transparency, upfront discussions. And I'm with you, mate, rather than all of the spreadsheets, have some consultation before we even go to tender
yeah,
to see the right fit.
yeah.
Sean, what about yourself?
I think if I look at it from an internal perspective on the demand side, I think there's a lot of education that needs to take place from a business perspective, from an internal FM perspective, and also from a procurement perspective. We're not buying pencils, we're buying technical services delivered by experts that can innovate for us. And so I think it's educating and it's changing mindsets internally that is the key requirement from my side.
Yeah, back to the change management. And final comments from David. You're on mute, David, I think. Are you on mute, David? Final comments from
I
you.
was coughing. I mean, the whole thing for me is, change management is a necessity if you want to get an innovative response, and that has to be on both sides of the fence. And I guess it does come down to a large extent to the client side, creating the environment where contractors feel that they've got an opportunity to bring innovation and invest in the future. And all of that comes back to, and I think something that Sean said, for me, it's the client side taking a strategic look at the business case and saying, what do we need as a business? And when that's fully articulated, then it becomes part of the engagement strategy. And these individual incentivized schemes disappear because it's not just about procurement. In a lot of the engineering companies that I work for, the best people to do procurement were the engineers. You just had to stop them telling everybody the secrets before they decided who they wanted to do it with. And that's because they could talk about the real issues. So for me, I think from an industry point of view, we're going to see a very changed world over the next few years. I don't think it's ever going to go back. And those customers or those demand side who recognize that contractors aren't there to rip them off, they just want a decent living, and then encourage them and bring them into the tent so that they can actually show what they can do.
Yeah. Well, look, that's been fantastic. Thank you, Sean Gibbons from Roche. Thank you, Simon Titchener from ISS. And thank you, David Hawkins from the Institute of Collaborative Workplace. Today's CPD number for the event, there it is. You can all read it. It's on the screen now. It's 7707. And just wanted to say thank you all for joining. We're developing our program for 2021 as the International Special Interest Group. If anyone wants to get involved in the International Special Interest Group, either as part of the committee or sponsors, or even just getting a bit more engaged, then please feel free to drop me a line on LinkedIn or email, or contact the IWFM team at Bishop Stortford. But thank you again for the panel debate. I would love to see more debate around this. I think it's a long time coming, and David, keep on that soapbox with collaborative business relationships. It's much required. So thank you all again. It's been a great debate. Really appreciate your time, and I know the people coming through on the chat box have appreciated the discussion today. So thank you. We'll close the proceedings. Thanks all. Bye bye.
Thanks for the invite.
Guys.
Bye bye.
Cheers all.
Bye bye.
Take care.